Welcome to Research Results on Holistic Brain Training, given by me, Kathy Johnson, of Pyramid of Potential, Inc. To give you a little bit of background, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I graduated with my master's in education in curriculum development and instructional technology. I started working with students in the year 2000, so I've been doing this type of work for over 15 years. Today, I am training students, not as many as I used to, but I do a lot of training of trainers and giving professional development and a lot of spreading the word of what can be done. Here are some links to various sites that you can learn more. www.pyramidofpotential.com. We have many videos on the YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/Pyramid of Potential, and www.brainadvancementteam.com. In order to let you know a little bit more about what a holistic brain training program is, I'm going to just quickly go over the pyramid of potential. And this is the basis for what I've been doing successfully to help people improve their brains for the last, 17 years. So at the top of the pyramid is academic success, but this also could be job success or just success in life in general. You notice that it's a small pyramid, a small triangle, and that below it are all these other levels. At the base of the pyramid, leading towards that academic success, we see mind and body health. Mind health are things like stress, depression, and anxiety, whereas body health can be things like sleep and nutrition, anything you place in your mouth, and as well as sleep, nutrition, and isn't that funny? Exercise. Of course, it's exercise. Up from there, we have neurodevelopment. When I speak of neurodevelopment, I'm talking about the development of the brain. And the most development happens, or the greatest year that we see so much neurodevelopment happening is in the first year of life. When the baby is born, he can't do very much, but by the time the baby is 1 year old, the baby can motor around, communicate, and feed itself. So there's an awful lot of development that happens during that first year of life. We normally look at those and call those stages of development, but they also have another name, and that's primitive reflexes. And basically that's just a fancy name for stages of development. An example of a stage of development is a 4-month-old baby. When you hold that baby over your head, the baby automatically goes into Superman, and it's really fun to zoom them around the room. If you put them on the floor, on their tummy, they automatically hold their head up and their shoulders and their arms and their legs. This particular stage of development, the primitive reflex, is called the tonic labyrinthine reflex. And we need to go through this particular stage for many things, including developing muscles in the neck, back, and shoulders. But neurodevelopmentally, that's what we're here for. It also is important for sequencing. We need sequencing for things like decoding and being able to read, keeping sounds of the word that we're sounding out in order. We need sequencing for writing so that we spell words correctly and we keep the words in order and we keep our thoughts and our sentences in order. And we also need sequencing for math, because math is all sequencing of numbers and things like that. So that's just one example. So this is really close to the base of the pyramid. And what I found is that every student that I've worked with who has had issues with learning has also had retained primitive reflexes, meaning that they didn't get through their stages of development well enough. Above that, from there, is sensory motor development. We are as concerned about motor development today, but we are very concerned about the sensory development, especially for learning, because the two senses that we use most when learning in school are the auditory sense and the visual sense. Now, these senses are developed well during the first year of life, okay, and they're developed during these stages and these primitive reflexes. But this has its own separate level here so that we can make sure that we really work on those senses well. Now, up from there is cognitive development. Cognitive skills that we need in order to have success are things like memory, attention, processing speed, logic and reasoning, and many others. And so when we look at this being above the sensory development, we see that it really leads into there because there are a couple different types of memory. There's auditory memory and there's visual memory. There's also different types of attention, which include, there's lots of types of attention, but there's also auditory attention, visual attention. So if we look at in order to get those cognitive skills, we also need to have good sensory development. In order to get good sensory development, we have to make sure that we go through those stages of development, which, by the way, we can go through them at any time in our lives. I've had a certain number of students, perhaps about 10%, where these three levels were not enough to then be able to get academic success, and they needed more in the mind and body health. But for the majority, they were able to get through these stages, these levels, and achieve academic success. And tonight, we're going to be taking a look at some of those cases and a couple research studies. Our first case study was Susan. She was the first student that I ever worked with. I had worked with her on reading, but it was interesting because a couple of years before the cognitive training started, this pyramid started, I had worked with her on reading, and she had not progressed. And you think that somebody should progress as their reading should progress as they read more, but that hadn't happened with her. Yes, when she was 9 was when I had worked with her in reading. So when she was 12 and had just finished 6th grade, she went to a psychologist and was tested. Her IQ was tested. And then I was helping the family, going through a process. Didn't know exactly what I was doing, just trying to find what could work. We worked for 2 years. She finished in 2003. When she started, she was in remedial reading and math. She was found to have learning disabilities with deficits in reading, phonemic awareness, and working memory. So once we got started, the psychologist actually suggested occupational therapy. So that was done for 4 months, and the occupational therapist did primitive reflex integration, a listening therapy, and sensory integration therapy. The OT worked with her 3 days a week, and the family worked with her the other 4 days a week so that she did her homework consistently. Then she did vision therapy, and that lasted for 8 weeks. Vision therapy, if you're not familiar with it, is working with a doctor of optometry who has additional learning and is able to put that as a therapy, which is very non-invasive, and it can last anywhere from a short period of time to years. And it doesn't usually only last for 8 weeks, but because of the other therapy that had been done first, the vision therapy was only needed for 8 weeks. Then the last thing she did was cognitive skills training with me. She did 60 hours in 10 weeks, and half of that, 3 days a week, was working with me. 3 days a week was working with her mom. So that's what happened. This is the therapy that she did, and here are the results of what happened. These are the IQ test was done by an independent psychologist, and it was 2 years apart. This is the WISC-4, highly respected IQ test. And this is a graph showing part of the IQ test. And very quickly, I'm going to go through in a minute, I will go through the definitions of what each of these sub-scores are. I just wanted you to take a look and notice that 2 years later, almost all the scores went up. On this graph, one stayed the same, and then you notice that one went down. And so I called the psychologist and asked why that would happen. And she said that when you do a test, it's a snapshot of how you do at that day, at that time, on that skill. And we all have good days and bad days. And we also are good at some skills some days and not as good on other days. Also, she said maybe that the child didn't sleep well the night before. And so her vocabulary did not actually decrease. That would be a very strange thing to happen. But that it is a basic flaw in all testing. So here are her other scores, which are even more impressive because all of these went up, and they went up by quite a bit. And if you look at a few of them, 10 is average, and several of her scores were quite low. But by the time she was done, all of her scores on both these charts are at 10 or above. Nothing is actually below average. So let's take a look at each of these sub-tests and what they're testing, and then how she scored. So information measures general cultural knowledge, long-term memory, and acquired facts. Her pre-test score was 12 and her post-test score was 12. Similarities measures logical thinking, verbal concept formation, and verbal abstract reasoning. And her pre-test score was 11, and then 2 years later went all the way up to 16. That is a huge leap. Arithmetic measures numerical accuracy, reasoning, and mental arithmetic ability. She started off at 9, slightly below average, and ended at 11, slightly above average. Vocabulary measures the student's verbal fluency and concept formation, word knowledge, and word usage. And that is the one that went down. Her pre-test score was 13, and her post-test score was 11. Comprehension measures common sense social knowledge, practical judgment in social situations, and level of social maturation, along with the extent of development of their moral conscience. She started off at 14 and went up to 15. Digit span measures short-term auditory memory and attention. She started off at 8, which is, fairly low, and ended up average. Picture completion measures a student's ability to recognize familiar items and to identify missing parts. She started off at 10 and went slightly up to 11. Coding measures visual motor dexterity, associative nonverbal learning, and nonverbal short-term memory. Fine motor dexterity, speed, accuracy, and ability to manipulate a pencil contribute to task success. She started off quite low, 6 is quite far below average, and ended up just above average. There's a star here before picture arrangement because this is a subtest that has been dropped from the WISC. It is no longer given, but it was part of a regular giving of the test back in 2001 and 2003. Picture arrangement gives information about an individual's reasoning abilities, and performance is related to the ability to understand precursors and consequences of events. She started off very, very low at 5 and ended up at the average score of 10. Block design measures an individual's ability to analyze and synthesize an abstract design and reproduce that design. Spatial visualization and analysis, simultaneous processing, visual motor coordination, dexterity, logic and reasoning, and nonverbal concept formation are involved. She started off at 11 and went up to 14. Object assembly is another one that has been dropped from the WISC, but was given back then. This measures part-to-whole reasoning and visual analysis and construction of objects. She started off at 11 and went up to 13. Her symbol search requires the student to determine whether a target symbol appears among the symbols shown in a search group. Memory is not a primary requirement for success on this task. Perception and recognition are the two prime requirements, in addition to speed, accuracy, attention, and concentration. She started off fairly below average at a 7 and ended up at 11. Maze also is not part of the current WISC 4 or WISC test. This subtest measures graphomotor planning, that is, using a pencil with your hand, visual motor coordination and speed, fine motor coordination, planning, and following directions. She started off quite low at 6 and ended up just above average at 11. So those are her scores, her raw scores, and they went up high enough and consistently enough to prove that her IQ did improve. When she was done, she immediately got out of remedial reading and math. She graduated from high school. She attended a 4-year private college and had no accommodations or tutors. She graduated with a cum of over 3.0. Today, she works for her state as a design and communication specialist. So that's our first case study. Our second case study is Allie. I worked with her in 2010. We started when she was 11 years old and in 5th grade. She was in special ed. She had a deficit in expressive and receptive language. She also had a deficit in problem solving, by making it very difficult to teach because of needing to understand directions, and directions are given in language, and she had a very difficult time with understanding language. Her brain training included primitive reflex integration for the first 3 months, along with listening therapy for the first 3 months. She did these for, combined probably about 45 minutes a day, 7 days a week. Then the last 3 months, She did cognitive skills training. That's one-on-one with me, and that was an hour a day. Um, Once again, 3 days a week with me, 3 days a week with her parents, for 12 weeks, 3 months total. And so the total of the full holistic brain training was 6 months. I used the Gibson test. This is an online test that is very objective because it's given through a computer, and the student um, can take this test without there being a subjective observer there. So her processing speed started off at 11.3, went up by 3 years in 6 months. Okay, that was huge. According to this test, her working memory did not go up. I felt it had, but once again, you have to look at the test and just see what's going on there. Visual processing, we see she went down by 8 years. By the way, 18 is the highest that you can get. So it's also a timed test. So in the beginning, she flew through the sub-test and did really, really well. Her post-test, however, was only 10. And because there was such a discrepancy, I had to look a little bit further than just to say, okay, this is a test and it's not perfect and we can be good some days and bad some days. So I asked her mom if she used to be impulsive, and she said absolutely, she used to just rush through her work just to get it done and didn't care if it was right or wrong. Well, she may have rushed through her visual processing test, but she got it right. And I did notice that when we were working on it later, that she took her time and she was really methodical. But the third reason why this score might have gone down and might have gone down so much is that her brain is not the same brain as it had been 6 months ago. We did not do visual therapy, any vision therapy or visual work. So that's part of what leads into this, but also because we've been retraining her brain during those 6 months, she may have used different modalities to try and solve the same problems and did not do them, was not very efficient in those modalities yet. Her word attack scores went up by 1.5 years and 6 months, which is, word attack is the ability to, you're going to see in a second, we'll go over the list of what the various subtests are, but her word attack scores went up by a little bit, but I did not teach her how to read. We did work, however, very hard on the next subtest, which is phonemic awareness. In her pretest, she had a 5, which is the lowest score that you can get, and in her post-test, she got 18, which is the highest sub-score that you can get. And she's about to go into middle school, as she should, and so she should be able to have perfect phonemic awareness so that she can read anything. I shamelessly taught directly to the test. The phonemic awareness test tests blending, and we did a lot of blending. It tests segmenting, and we did a lot of that. And it did phoneme or sound manipulation. We did a lot of that. Finally, logic and reasoning. And she went up nearly 5 years in just that 6 months. So let's now go take a look more in depth at those cognitive skills definitions of the Gibson cognitive test. Processing speed is the ability to perform cognitive tasks, particularly when measured under pressure to maintain focused attention. And she went up by 3 years. Working memory is the ability to hold information in immediate awareness while performing a mental operation on it. And she didn't really go up because it shows that she went up a half a year, and that was, her post-test was a half a year later. Visual processing is the ability to perceive, analyze, synthesize visual patterns, including the ability to store and recall visual images. And this is the one that she went down. And the test looks like a jigsaw puzzle that's taken apart, and you have to match the piece to the piece in the puzzle. Word attack is the knowledge of and application of sound codes in order to pronounce unknown words. And I'm sorry, I typed in the wrong scores here because her scores, no, that's correct. She did that correctly. I'm sorry. Her score went up about 1.5 years. It was her phonemic awareness, the ability to analyze and manipulate speech sounds. A crucial underlying skill for reading and spelling went from the lowest possible score to the highest possible score. And finally, logic and reasoning is the ability to reason, form concepts, and solve problems using unfamiliar information or novel procedures. And she went up by about 5 years. Her final result was that she was out of special ed for 6th grade. She continued with reading and math remediation, did that with me. We worked for the first couple months, twice a week for an hour. And then after the first of the year, once a week for an hour. It was remediation. This was not at all, working on homework. My time and the parents' money is way too valuable to spend it on homework. So we are working on filling in the blanks that hadn't been filled in before. And so we had, she had no accommodations in 6th grade, just the work with me. And by the end of 6th grade, she was on the high honor roll. And she is attending college in the fall this year. So very excited for Allie. The next case study is not mine. This is from Carol Brown, who owns Equipping Minds. Her case study has been published. It's called Equipping Minds for Christian Education or Learning. And it is found at the Neuroscience and Christian Formation book, and published by the Information Age Publishing Incorporated in 2016. So Marie had Down syndrome, and up until during 3rd grade, there was no growth in her MAP scores. MAP stands for Measures of Academic Progress. So there was no growth in MAP during 3rd grade or the fall of 4th grade. She started brain training with Carol at that point. They worked for 9 weeks, an hour a day, 5 days a week. They were training on processing, working memory, comprehension, and reasoning very specifically. Normal growth for MAP scores is in a year, I think, normal growth is to go up 3 to 5 points. But after that 9 weeks, her reading went up 20 points. Her math went up 11 points. Science went up 25 points. And language arts went up 17 points. So doing this type of work can highly, highly affect academics, as you can see. And many people believe that if you have Down syndrome, that you cannot learn at all as fast as someone else. And yet here Carol worked with her and did so well. Such a great job. Here's another research study that Carol has completed, and she completed it very recently. The study is called Cognitive Development Curriculum Increases Verbal, Nonverbal, and Academic Abilities. So this will be published in the Journal of Alternative Medicine Research, which is a peer-reviewed journal. This actually was her doctorate dissertation. She started off with 32 students who all had a specific learning disorder. They were randomly put into an experimental group or an active control group, and all were in grades 4 through 8. The control group had academic intervention, okay? At the same time, the experimental group had sound therapy, maintaining brains every day, which is reflex integration therapy, and cognitive skills training. This went on for only 7 weeks, but it was an hour a day, 5 days a week during school. Their results. There was significant improvement in verbal, nonverbal, and composite IQ scores versus the control group. So yes, you shouldn't do IQ so close together. However, because they had the control group, they could do a full analysis to see if there is a significant difference between the two, and there most certainly was. Also, academically, there was significant improvement in their test scores, and their science test scores. Finally, one more research study, and this study has been going on since June 2014, and right up until May, okay, we have had 64 coaches go through a very specific brain advancement coach training program. We've had more try. They did not finish. These are 64 coaches who started and finished. Their average age is 49. So this is not children. But one thing that we do understand about children is that their brains seem to be more easily changed, and that they can change faster. So these coaches went through 4 months of training, an hour a day, 5 to 7 days a week. For the first 30 days, they did primitive reflex integration using maintaining brains. They did a listening therapy, and they did vision work. Those 3 things took approximately an hour a day. So for the first month, it was these things from the lower part of the pyramid of potential. After the 30 days, then they started watching 60 half-hour video lessons that were pre-recorded. They were requested to do a half hour of homework based on those lessons beyond that, to give a full hour of cognitive training. This is the 60 half-hour cognitive training lessons. This was done 5 days a week, and it took an additional 12 weeks to do these. So this was a 4-month program. There was pre and post testing using the Gibson cognitive test, which I went over previously when we discussed Allie. So here's their average change, okay, between all 64 in percentile points. Before I go over them, I want to just tell you a little bit about the coaches. Some of the coaches, not that many, started off with very high scores, and like in the 90th percentile for most of their cognitive skills. So there wasn't a whole lot of room for them to move up. Most of the gross majority of the coaches had scores in all different varying degrees. And when they took their post-test, several of them, and actually probably at least half, had at least one score that went down a little. Maybe it didn't go down a lot, but it went down. So not everybody does exactly the same. These are just averages. But because we are taking 64 different scores and checking their averages, that can really tell us a real story. Now, these are percentile points. This means that if somebody were to score 50 on this particular subtest, that would be average. The 50th percentile is average. And the 99th percentile is the highest that you can get. So what I did was I took all of their scores, their percentile scores, and averaged them up. So the average of all 64, their processing speed changed by going up by 8.6 percentile points. Their working memory went up by 8.3 percentile points. Look at this auditory memory. This is being able to remember short-term and long-term things that you have heard, and this went up the most. So here we see that people who are an average age of 49, their memory is not going down, their memory is improving, and it went up by 12.6 percentile points. Visual memory went up by 8.5 percentile points. Long-term memory, 10.5. Visual processing, very interesting, isn't it? How this particular score, with the way that I've been doing the training, does not yield significant results, even whether it was case studies or whether it was the broader research. Auditory processing, which would be phonemic awareness, went up 6.4 percentile points. Logic and reasoning went up by 10. Word attack, the ability to sound out nonsense words, went up 10 percentile points. And their average change, if I average all these out, showed that their cognitive skills average went up by 8.5 percentile points. So it works, guys. This process that I've been doing for quite a long time, it works. We now have real numbers and a peer-reviewed research study, case studies. It's quite something. So you probably would like to know where to get more information. If you're interested in finding a coach near you, go to www.brainadvancementteam.com. And some of those coaches who were part of that 64 were going through it for themselves. Some were going through it for only their children, and they are not, so you won't find all 64 on there. But you will be able to find many, and perhaps there's a coach near you if you're interested. You can go to the main website, which is pyramidofpotential.com. Our YouTube videos are at youtube.com/pyramidofpotential. You can email me at kjohnson@pyramidofpotential.com. You can call the office at 518-260-3937. And today was all about the numbers, but if you would like to hear from the mouths of people who have been going through all of this information, you can go to pyramidofpotential.com/testimonials.